Oh my gosh, this movie. Like Caro.
Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of Cinemaball. I'm here with my co-host and opponent, Ebony Aster. Hey, Ebony.
Hey, Caro.
So, Cinemaball is a ridiculous excuse for Ebony and I to talk about movies. My goal in the game of Cinemaball is to connect one movie to another through actors, directors, and other folks until hopefully I get us to the 1998 Jean-Claude Van Damme film Knockoff and score some points. Ebony is on defense and is trying to prevent that from happening. Last week, Ebony tossed the Cinemaball from Kickboxer Retaliation to the 2014 horror film It Follows. At the end of this episode, I will announce our next film, but for now, it's time for us to face the inescapable suburban terror of It Follows. Ebony, start us off with a little background here.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, It Follows comes out in 2014. It is a, low-budget indie horror film by a director named David Robert Mitchell, who is his entire to date has been in these sort of smaller pictures, largely set in Michigan, where he's from. So in a way, kind of a current day John Hughes in a way, and that very much invested in exploring like interior lives of teens in these suburban / urban adjacent spaces, which we'll get into as we talk more about Cinemaball. But the film is it came out in limited release and sort of, rapidly progressed by word of mouth. And so I remember not long after it appeared on the scene, hearing people discuss this film. And as you know, like I like to dip my toes into the horror genre occasionally while at the same time talking trash about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so before I saw the movie, I was like, yeah, I get it. Okay, a teen girl has sex. It follows, we all know, like, even if you're not a horror fan, we all know the genre's kind of obsession with teen sexuality.
Yes.
Right? And like, if you have sex, you're probably marked for death.
Yeah.
So before I saw the film, I was like, yeah, okay, I get it,
Right.
Yes. And there's something I shouldn't say something very different, but this film definitely starts from a different kind of place, and also would like us to go a different route when understanding teens and their budding sexuality and their like growing acknowledgement of their desires, right? So we'll get into that, but yeah, that's just some background on the film, and later we'll talk about what the director himself says he was thinking in terms of like the kind of overarching mythology of the film and how it all works and the kind of dream logic in operation. But yeah, that's just a little background on the movie.
Yeah, great. I mean, so just to sum up the basic plot mechanism, I guess, for listeners who may not have seen the film. It's the film centers on this teenager named Jay, and she after she has sex with this boyfriend of hers for the first time, he sort of reveals to her that he has been pursued by this being, and that by having sex with her, he has now essentially passed the being's. She is now the target of this being. And the being moves very slowly. It walks, but it is always out there, inching closer towards you. And so Jay can, if Jay has sex with someone else, it will then be sort of passed on to that next person. But it's sort of this, like this hierarchy in a way, like you're always X number of steps sort of down the line, right? Like if it gets to who's ever at the front of the line and offs that person, then and you were the person who handed it off to them, then you become its its target.
Yeah, and it's best not to spend too much time, trying to unravel
Oh yeah.
the logic of this film. In fact,
Oh.
it will hinder your enjoyment if you go in as like, Johnny Calculus trying to figure out like, okay, but if I do this and if I have, like can a married couple just pass it back and forth,
Right.
and fool it? Like don't waste time trying to do that.
That's a sort of, to me, that those aren't interesting kinds of questions, and to me they sort of just fail to acknowledge and accept the fact that this film does operate with a kind of dream logic. It is not meant to be interpreted as like a literal, what would you do in this situation?
Right.
Those kinds of questions. It's about tapping into our fears around sex and intimacy and death, and how it's a very kind of straightforward and simple interpretation to think about this film in terms of like STDs and things that get passed on from one person to another sexually in that way. But to me, to interpret it just that way, there's certainly valid things to discuss in that space, but that's also a limiting lens for something that I think taps so deeply into how sex can be a kind of it's one of the few things humans can do that is almost sort of inherently a rebuke of death, or an attempt to sort of stave off death, and because of that, though, death is in some ways inherently like intertwined in those kinds of thoughts and feelings in those psychological spaces within us. Now, let me say up front, this movie scared the hell out of me. Like, after I watched the movie, and I'm alone in my apartment, and it's like...
and you were like, God damn it, Ebony.
Yes, yeah. And I'm sitting there laughing at myself because I'm so worked up by this film, and I wind up like texting a friend just to have a little bit of like human contact. And I'm thinking about how, well, okay, A Quiet Place, for instance, it's sort of scary in the moment. It has there's a lot of tension there, but in no way whatsoever do I walk out of A Quiet Place and feel like, oh God, the aliens that are super sensitive to sound are going to get me. Like, it just doesn't happen at all. But this film, because it taps into, again, I think, like, sex and just those kinds of things. I was like sort of laying awake seeing the images from this film in my mind. So interestingly, in this film, it can take many forms. And a lot of the forms it takes are of body. So, Ebony, you wrote a great piece on feministfrequency.com quite some time ago about the use of like the hag in horror. And a lot of the bodies that it takes on are bodies that exist sort of, that maybe they don't work properly in some way, or just in some ways for those of us who are very fortunate to be, abled or able-bodied, and they can, there's something about these bodies that can just, and maybe young, able-bodied, etc. There's something about the bodies that it manifests in that can kind of tap into our fears about just degrading as we get older, or losing our faculties, and just kind of that decline, like physical decline, I think, which to me was one of the most kind of insidious and scary aspects of this film, just in terms of its imagery. There's one figure in particular that it takes on at one point, which is listed in the credits as Giant Man.
Oh my God!
And so the young people are Jay and her friends are in this small suburban house. They're like in an upstairs bedroom basically at this point, which is a very bad situation to be in. And so we see, because only Jay in this situation, only Jay can see it, because none of the other people who are there at that time have been touched by it or have been pursued by it. And so it might cut to the figure, and it'll be in one form, and then we see Jay like freaking out or whatever, and then it'll cut back and it will already be like some other form. And so there's like a very brief kind of moment where it is this giant man who like he kind of okay. There's something about it. It has a kind of intelligence. It pursues you with a kind of just
Well, definitely like a single-minded
a
focus.
single-minded focus,
Mhm.
exactly, and a kind of like a lack of uh, I'm trying to. There's something so chilling about the way that I mean, it's this thing. It's the Mike Myers Halloween thing in some sense of the kind of just relentless focus. But there's something in particular about the way the intelligence on display here that is it's like the body of it is purely a vehicle for just getting closer to you.
Right.
And so the face of the giant man is it's almost as if, he sees nothing whatsoever but Jay as he's stepping towards her. And so he doesn't seem in any way moved, phased by anything around him at all but Jay. And so it's just there's this kind of it's this terrifyingly casual. It's not like he's growling and grimacing like I'm going to get you. It's just this it makes it feel all the more unstoppable that the expression on his face is so just kind of flat almost. And like I was so chilled by the images of this figure in the film that I looked up like an interview with him just to sort of like humanize him in my mind,
right.
because and in this interview that I read, like he's a really sweet guy,
Yeah.
who just happened to be this very tall person who lived in the Detroit area, and they needed a really tall person, and so he shows up to do the film and everything. And reading about him as like, what's it like being a really tall person in the world and everything, just how that kind of humanizing aspect kind of helped me like not be so haunted by these images from this film.
Yeah, one of the things that I loved about this film is that it is never defined, never explained.
Yes.
We never come to know why it is doing what it is doing. We are not given the solace of having any explanation, any clues to the riddle given to us.
Right.
So, for instance, like, with horror mainstays like, Jason or Freddy Krueger or Mike Myers, there is some rationale, however flawed it may be, for why they are doing these things. We never understand why it is doing what it's doing. And in a way, the vehicle that it is using to find victims, I don't want to suggest that it's incidental, but it's not, or does not appear to be, about some kind of moralistic statement about sex itself. So in many horror films, particularly the horror genre that is obsessed with like teens and teens who are somehow not under adult supervision when they should be, right? There's this very, reactionary, moralistic tone taken when considering like these kids, if you're not watching them, they're out finger banging each other at summer camp or whatever, right? And there's something wrong with that. This film doesn't suggest that there's anything wrong with people having sex.
Sure.
And in fact, the way that you can save yourself is also through sex, and the director talks about this, right? So sex is potentially the vehicle for your demise, but also the vehicle of your salvation, in as much as you are never totally safe. You're only like 1 plus degrees of separation away from the thing following you. But going back to it, like you never know why it is doing what it's doing, and it is therefore that much more terrifying because you cannot reason with it, you cannot trick it, you can't talk it out of what it is doing for whatever reason it is and yes, there is an intelligence there, but it is one that we cannot apprehend.
Exactly.
It has a mission, and it is going to fulfill that mission.
Yeah. To go to what you were just saying, actually, Walker Talton tweeted at me when after learning that we were going to be talking about It Follows, and they said that they love the film. They said, I can't decide if it's sex positive or negative, though I can see it both ways. Thoughts? And yeah, to me, it is not. It is neither you know, it's not about, it's not, neither sex negative nor positive.
Mhm.
It's about, it's acknowledging the how the complexity of all of the fears and everything that are sort of inextricably woven up in and related to sex in one way or another,
Mhm.
you know?
Mhm. Yeah, I think part of the one of the threads of this particular genre of horror, like the teen suburban horror, is that the being on the cusp of adulthood itself is terrifying. So you think about what a compelling and resonant kind of message that would be for its presumably largely teen or young audience, right? This recognition that there is a danger, particularly for young women who are about to leave the cloak of childhood and enter a world that has very few protections, you know? And so that's why I think it's important that we rarely see adults in this movie, you know? So even though they're
Yes.
often, you know, in the house, we see the mother, I think in one key scene around the rest of the time, you'd be forgiven for thinking these kids were existing in a world
I-
entirely without adults,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And so the fear of having to navigate these challenges, these horrors on your own, having to make those decisions on your own, that in and of itself is the fear
Yeah.
behind all of this.
Yeah. And this film, I mean, I have to say, like, the nature of the threat in this film and the way that it's handled by the director and the filmmakers
Hmm.
made it such that, I mean, I watched it differently than I watch most films in the sense that any background actor, right? I caught my attention in a way. Like
Yes.
I was on guard. I was very vigilant. I
Hmm.
was because the film, much to its credit, like does not always, you know, make a big deal about its appearance, right?
Right.
There's a scene that's extremely chilling to me where Jay, so she has sex with this boy who lives like across the street, and we're watching she's watching from her window as this, you know, this young guy in like a t-shirt and shorts and stuff kind of shows up at that door, and like you don't even know at first, like, is that it, or is
Right.
that is that like a friend of the fan, like who could, right? But of course the dead single-minded way that the figure proceeds to knock on the door and then after no response pick up this brick or something and throw it through the window, etc. Like, you know that it's it, but it doesn't, it's not doing the big music, it's not doing the
Right.
big, like, it's, which makes it so much more terrifying almost, that we're just kind of watching this play out as a distant observer, but
Hmm.
knowing that it is is closing in on a potential victim who is
Right.
not Jay, not our protagonist, but who reveals what the danger that Jay is in.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I loved about this movie is the very effective use / non-use of jump scares.
Yeah,
So
yes.
when we see like the giant man, for instance, like that, oh my, I lost 10 smooth years off my life, but it's not overused.
Yeah.
Some of the most terrifying scenes are like the kind of inexorable slow march
Yes.
of that elderly woman across
Yes,
the
whole
courtyard.
school campus. Oh my
Yes,
God.
you know, like we're slowly watching
that
her
patience.
advance.
Exactly. The film
Exactly.
is so patient with that stuff.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
I loved how it took its time.
Yeah.
And there were moments when I thought I would sometimes when you watch horror movies or thrillers, you think I would not, you know, like the characters will be, you know, kind of, you know, stuck in place, right? Like watching something come at them and you're yelling at them like run, run, right? And you think I would
Yes.
never be stuck like that, you know, my instincts would kick in. And yet there was a way in which I was watching that old woman walk towards and I thought I would be stuck here because my eyes, you don't want to take your eyes
Right.
off that person because you know that it can move in a second into
Yes.
someone else.
Right.
You know,
Right.
oh my gosh, this movie, like Caro, afterwards, I was a little bit cursing myself. It was like, why did I do this? I should not have decided to watch this at 2 in the morning by myself.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the film, the world in which the film takes place, because it's Detroit.
Yeah. Although it took me a while to figure out.
Oh, me too.
Where it was located,
Yeah.
and then I didn't, because it was like. It seems suburban. Like the opening shots, are all about establishing normalcy and safety and stability, right? So it's this very suburban street.
Yeah.
But then, there's, I think it's Jay's house that's actually on, like, their backyard is on the water. Like there's a big lake. And I was like, okay, where is this beach? And then it wasn't until we saw a street sign that said like 12 Mile, and then one of the characters mentioned 8 Mile. And I was like, oh, okay, so we're outside of Detroit.
Yeah. Yeah, and Detroit to me, I mean, okay, so this film, all those shots of the suburbs are so effective, and they're aided tremendously by disaster pieces, fantastically atmospheric score, such that they take the placidity, the sort of illusion of like a kind of normalcy and stability and safety of the suburbs, and make that so unsettling. Like you just know that that there's something under the surface that's right. I mean, that's or that it is there to disrupt completely that illusion of kind of safety. And but and I think Detroit is so beautifully kind of photographed and shot in this film, and it's a city that it has such an identity of its own in the sense that so many films take place in Los Angeles or New York, and when a film takes place in, say, Detroit, which is not a city that is home to to a lot of films, because Detroit doesn't seem to have the kind of artifice of a city like Los Angeles, as I'm watching the film, there's something that just feels much more kind of tangible and concrete about the city, and I think that the way that it's shot and the way that place, there's so many establishing shots of place or car POV shots that really take us down roads and through parts of town. I mean, Detroit definitely kind of gets its due visually in this film, and yet there's something about the world of the film that's ever so slightly off, in the sense that so the kids, the teens, whenever they're like, say, hanging out at home watching TV, it's always these like old
movies,
old movies on old TVs.
Yes,
there is no like HD TVs or anything, and also so that kind of, but then to me, the one thing that really contrasts with that and really takes us into this space that makes the world of this film feel truly kind of again, dreamlike, I guess, for lack of a better term in the moment, is that one of Jay's friends has this sort of clamshell Kindle-like device that feels like something vaguely futuristic. Mm-hmm. It's not from our present, but it's just this strange device, and the film never explains this. It never explains why the technology in this film is what it is. It's just aspects of its world that we sort of have to accept as we enter it. And
I going back a bit to Detroit, and the place where this movie is set, there's a really interesting way in which the film posits that this is happening nowhere and this place at the same time. Yeah. So one of the things that we don't get, in addition to not getting, very clear visual markers, like if you're not from that area, you'd be forgiven for not knowing that this is the area outside of 8 Mile in Detroit, right? Until, 2/3 of the way through the movie. But so there are no visual markers that will clue you in to where you are, that we are accustomed to seeing. So there are no chains, like chain stores. The brands that we see are not recognizable brands. Like it's one point a character is drinking soda and it just says cola.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
There are no sort of, like I said, visual markers. There are no recognizable brands. The cars they drive are, very kind of,
Old
just
clunkers.
Exactly, right? So some of the things that we typically use to anchor ourselves visually in a movie are not there. So in a way to suggest this could be any place.
Yeah.
But then there are these things like this clamshell Kindle, that anchor them very specifically to a time and place, but a foreign one that we can't identify.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
the movie resists having us, have anything be it kind of, easily understood.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, I'm going to put on my grad student nerd here hat for a second. The scene in which the older woman, the body that it is inhabiting, is walking towards Jamie across this college courtyard. Jamie is in an English class. Her professor is reading aloud to the students from the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock.
Yeah.
Okay? By T.S. Eliot. Eliot, a modernist poet, like part of what is going on in that, prose poem in that moment in modernism is all about presenting these very clear images in succession that are not explained in a traditional narrative fashion, which is exactly what this movie is doing.
Right.
So you have these amazing set pieces, like the scene of the old woman walking towards Jamie, or the scene where, towards the end of the movie where, Jamie starts to take off her clothes on the side of the beach and swim towards these guys in a boat, right? These images that you are linking in your mind that are meant to evoke a feeling, but are not going to be explained to you. In a way that we are accustomed to having them explained, especially in a horror film.
Yeah. I also think that there's something sort of interesting happening around class in this film, and this to some extent it goes back to the bodies. So I mean, of our, we have these, I guess like young corn-fed American teenagers, right? They all look very healthy and everything, and they live in this kind of suburban, it seems to me like middle class / upper middle class almost, in terms of like a lot of the homes and everything. And at a certain point when they're kind of investigating, trying to find out how Jay got into the situation and where it is coming from and everything, they go to parts of town that one could sort of euphemistically describe as like the wrong side of the tracks, and but the thing about the threat of it is that it is not, it is not bound by those things. It does not reside in any particular area. It is not a manifestation of just it is not something that only the lower classes are endangered by, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that I was very grateful for, going back to the notion that you shouldn't try to, you shouldn't be looking for a roadmap on how to beat it.
Right.
In linear logic,
No.
right?
Yeah, there's this great, just like to that point, I think there's this great moment too where it, as relentless as it is in pursuing you, like it is not above just fucking with you, because there's like there's a scene where Jay's sort of been anxiously anticipating its presence, its arrival. Finally, she and her friends go down to get in the car. They're backing up. They're getting the fuck out of there. And it is just in the form of like this older man, this very physically like imposing older man, is just standing on fucking roof, like totally naked, watching her and her friends like drive away. Whoa.
Oh my God. So, I know. Oh my God.
Yeah.
This fucking movie. But one thing I was very glad that this movie did not do, and I think would absolutely have happened in a more mainstream teen horror flick that does have a very moralistic attitude towards sex.
Yeah.
There would absolutely have been a character in another movie that said, why don't you just go fuck a hooker and have this not be a problem anymore.
Sure.
Sex workers get thrown under the bus.
Oh my God.
In the worst ways. And we're hearing this particularly right now, going back again to incel culture,
Yeah.
this non-answer, this horrifying non-answer where people are like, why don't these guys just go find, sex workers to have sex with? Completely bypassing the fact that we don't want sex workers to have to deal with these abusive assholes either.
Right.
Like, this is not their problem to fix.
Yes.
And so I was very glad that the movie, like, no one suggested that. We do see a scene later with Jay's friend, and I'm blanking on the name of the kid, the one who's kind of moony over her throughout the entire movie, driving past two sex workers on the street.
Right.
But the movie itself never suggests that this should be the problem of people who make their money, who survive through sex, right? And I was so grateful for that, because it could have so easily have been displaced onto this very vulnerable community, and that was never done.
That's a really excellent point. So as the film approaches its ending, the teens sort of hatch this plan to defeat it by having Jay go into a swimming pool, and then once it is in the water, they will, I guess, electrocute it by
I didn't understand
throwing...
this plan. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I didn't get how this was going to work. So if it follows her and Jamie into the water,
right?
Jay into the water,
I think
she's
the idea
presumably got to
scramble the fuck out of there, and because they know or believe that it moves so slowly, I think they suspected that Jay could get out of the water.
Okay.
In plenty of time,
Right.
leaving it kind of stranded in the pool,
Right.
such that they could act on this plan.
Okay.
But of course, it's so. First of all, I thought, well, such an interesting plan, and doomed to failure in the sense that you cannot use sort of technology to defeat something that is so kind of primal and exists so outside of technology.
Right.
But its intelligence manifests again in that final scene where it's smart enough to know, I think, just the way that it flips their plan on its head and instead starts hurling these devices at Jay, rather than just single-mindedly pursuing her and making itself vulnerable. Oh, another just terrifying.
Yeah, there the scenes where, God, what is that kid's name? Paul or something?
Paul sounds right.
Let's just call him Paul.
Yeah.
The scenes where he is shooting the gun into the water, those are really amazing shots.
Yes.
Yeah. And again, going back to these idea of like just these clear, like ice clear images, and the way in which the film just kind of gives you these things and lets you sit with them. Yeah, when it goes left, when you expect it to go right.
Yeah.
When it doesn't respond the way that you want it to, you just know there's no escaping this thing. The dread, the creeping horror of this movie is so existential as opposed to just purely bodily horror.
Yes.
Yes. It was just so incredibly effective. I do think it was so interesting that they came up with this plan to hopefully dispatch it. That didn't work, but it involved Jay floating in water, which is something we see her doing throughout the movie.
Course, yeah.
In this very kind of like, in a way, womb-like state, like in her family's backyard, just floating and being kind of lulled into a sense of security and peace through water. She's going to attempt to reclaim that peace and security in this pool, and it will not allow that to happen. She can no longer go back to that place of innocence. That's simply not possible for her, and I think you can read the actual ending of the movie in a lot of ways, but I don't think there's a lot of hope. The movie does not leave you with a lot of hope that there's anything that can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it does not seem vulnerable or defeatable, right?
Yeah,
It will
yeah.
always be pursuing someone. Yes, extremely chilling horror film. All right, so moving on, I guess
Yeah.
we can start to wrap things up. Let's maybe finish up by letting the listeners in on our Furious or Fab Five.
Yeah.
We can do like a speed round of things that we loved or hated about the film for whatever reason. Ebony, go ahead and run us down your list first.
Yeah, so mine, it's probably a mixture of Furious and Fab, but they are primarily questions because there were some things I did not get, some things I'm never gonna get over, but Hugh, why did he take so long finding someone? So Jay,
Oh, so
like
Hugh being the boyfriend,
right,
that passes it on to Jay.
like for some reason, this is so stupid, Caro. For some reason, I found it kind of sweet that he took the time to get into a relationship with Jay
Yeah.
before doing this, because then he was able to have the conversation with her, like, okay, I know what I've just done is horrible, but
Super
please,
horrible.
yeah, but here's how you defeat this thing. Like, here's,
Yes.
what we can do.
Yeah.
But I was like, it took you a month, and also you lived in this rattle trap, like, death house the whole time. I'm surprised he made it that long.
Yeah, me too.
The scene where the next door neighbor kid, after he has had sex with Jay, she runs across the street to try and protect him when she sees it coming. It inhabits the form of his mother.
Yes.
His death scene, never gonna get over that. Never, ever in my life.
Truly terrifying.
Yep. I loved how this film is absolutely what I call a genre monster. Like, it knows the horror genre inside and out. And so giving us its play on the final girl who has a kind of, androgynous or masculine name, Jay. I loved that. I loved how the old movies they saw were old science fiction movies and thrillers, right? Just as a call out to genre. I love how this film does what horror films are famous for doing. People making absolutely incomprehensible choices in the face of overwhelming fear. Like, I absolutely love that. So those are my five.
All right. Yeah. So me, Giant Man permanently, emblazoned in my nightmare library. Just absolutely terrifying. The elevated pools of the suburbs, right? These, I remember, I grew up in a neighborhood where if people had pools, that was kind of the norm, were those pools that the circular pools that just like rest on the ground. And it was, sort of almost this thing, I think, like a little bit, there's like a little bit of class stuff around that of like, oh, well, like the really wealthy people or whatever, they're going to have the pools dug, like the actual pools in their backyard, as opposed to just this circular tub that you just lay on the grass in your backyard. But it's so interesting the way that Jay, as she's trying to just like relax in that pool in the backyard, she's like observed by two kind of teen, boys or whatever, and she like says, I see you, but already it's like that sense of the burden of female sexuality, right? That like that the innocence is gone, and that it does become this thing that there can be, of course, pleasure there and beauty and wonderful things, but also that burden that society puts on women as sexual objects, as objects of desire. Like, just a great little moment that I feel like acknowledges that. I love car POV shots, and this film has a lot of them, just where they're just driving somewhere, and for a while, like, you're just kind of watching Detroit, the streets of whatever neighborhood they're in, roll by. The unexplained world building, kind of just those details that just offset the world just a teeny tiny bit, and the film doesn't bother to like try to say like to explain them at all. It just makes the world of the film feel that much more sort of dreamlike, but it's tangential to our own. It's right there, like pushing up against our own. It's not quite our own, but it's right there. And just the way that the film makes the suburbs the kind of nothing, the way that often in the suburbs there's nothing to do but like hang out on the couch with your friends and watch TV or whatever, kind of makes that, it taps into the kind of oppressiveness or of that just sort of boredom or inescapability, I guess, of those like long teen summers with like very little to do, right? Yeah, so that's my 5 things. As far as so I want to say a bit about Disaster Piece's soundtrack. On our initial episode about Highlander, thank you. We did a playlist or naylist segment where we talked about Queen's soundtrack and whether we would want that in our personal playlist. I don't know. So Disaster Piece's score, I think, again, it's so effective within this film, right? And because the neighborhood where I live, where my apartment is, it's a leafy suburban street. It bears a passing resemblance to some of the neighborhoods in this film. And so it's almost like, when I wake up in the morning to come to work, as I'm walking to the BART station, the texture, the suburban texture around me, just conjures that sort of destabilizing sound of Disaster Piece's soundtrack in my mind, so that I feel a bit on edge,
right.
And then I get to this city, San Francisco, where I work, and the energy in San Francisco is so different that that kind of fear, that ambience, that ominousness feels like at a remove. It's almost like it could get you anywhere, but it's almost like it can't really get me here. But then again, I go home at night and I'm back, walking home, and I'm like, oh shit, I'm back in I feel the disaster piece-ness of this place again.
It's so interesting because whenever the kids in this movie go someplace isolated, I'm like, why are you doing this? Go there, you need to be around people or whatever. And I'm like, no because if you're around people, the danger is that much more elevated, right?
Yeah.
And yet I couldn't resist that. Yeah, I had that same reaction. There's something about we could have all kinds of class analysis baked into this, but there's something specifically about these liminal spaces, the suburbs, that are not quite this and not quite that,
Yes.
That really we know how to exist in them, but we don't quite know how to understand them.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's a sort of there's almost like an inherent dream logic to American suburbs, almost, right? There's a sort of obscuring of actual systems and problems and things like that, right? I mean, it's like in a lot of suburbs you can completely forget about the existence of the American underclass, for instance, right? And that's part of just the dream that the suburbs can conjure, but the truth is more complicated and dangerous than that.
Yeah, and I mean, when you think about the idea of the suburbs is that ostensibly these places are built up and create strong communities, right? But you can also, you think about the opening of a movie like Get Out, right? Where you have this quiet suburban street at night.
Yeah.
If you need help, there's no one around,
Right.
and is someone going to answer the door for you? Maybe, but probably not. Whereas if you were on a city street, you know that there are going to be people hanging around on their stoop, or, the bodegas will be open or whatever. There are at least other people with whom you can make a human connection.
Yes.
If not to help, then at least to witness. The power of having someone just witness what's going on is something that is largely lost in the suburbs. But anyways, that's a discussion for a whole nother show.
I mean, I know we could go on for there's so much to talk about here. Yeah. Okay, so it's time for us to render our verdicts on this film using Ebony's Brothers' patented 100-star scale.
I will never get over how dumb I thought this idea was when my brother first broached it, and now I'm completely on board. And in fact, I just saw my brother, had him record a little bit of explainer.
Yes, we gotta get
so
that.
hopefully our producer will be able to loop that into
Yes.
an episode so you can hear my brother break down his ludicrous explanation. It's ludicrous and yet completely coherent explanation for the 100 stars.
Absolutely.
So for me,
yes.
I was blown away by so much in this movie. So I'm giving it 94 stars.
Okay. Yes. I mean, to me it is definitely like a bona fide modern day horror classic. It is the most chilling horror film certainly that I've seen in a long time on like a psychological and emotional level. So I'm giving it 85 stars, but that for me that's very very high praise. All right. So before I share next week's film,
oh boy,
with y'all, we want to maybe solicit your input a bit, listeners. So it's occurred to us that there might be just a tiny bit of a flaw in the structure of Cinemaball as a game, which is just that the player on offense, who's currently me, to reach the goal film, like my only chance of reaching the goal film is if Ebony as defender sort of picks a film that is one away from the goal film. And maybe that's okay, right? Maybe cinema is so interwoven, and there's so many executive producers who work on this film and have also worked on that film that's enough of a window that scoring goals, the occasional goal is possible. Maybe not, but so if you have suggestions, do you think this is like an issue? And if so, do you have suggestions on how we can adjust the rules to address this while hopefully still keeping the game itself interesting? If so, we'd love to hear from you. Hit us up on Twitter. You can find me at Carolyn Michelle. And Ebony, where can folks find you?
At Ebony Aster.
At Ebony Aster. Okay. So, the moment of truth. What are we watching next?
Oh my God.
Sorry.
The last time this was in your hands, Carolyn.
Yeah, I know. And I have to say, this was another really challenging selection for me this week because there were a few compelling directions I could have gone. Because the actor who plays Jay in this film, she plays I believe she plays the president's daughter in the new Independence Day film.
Oh my God.
Which seemed like an attractive choice purely for the cast members, all the huge cast of actors and people who that would give me and us access to in terms of where do we branch out from there. And of course, it's got your boy Jeff Goldblum in it.
Right.
But I did not want to sit through that film. She's also in this film called Labor Day, which seems to me, it stars Kate Winslet and Josh Brolin, and it seems like the kind of non-offensive, Steadicam heavy, like prestige film that I wouldn't hate, right? But that I wouldn't find any particularly interesting either. But but instead of going in either of those directions, I'm actually fairly intrigued and looking forward to the film that I've selected for our next viewing, which we're getting there through a producer. Man, producers just open up so many opportunities. Oh, yeah. And the film, it's directed by a director named Joachim Trier, and the film is called Louder Than Bombs. It's a film from a few years ago that stars Gabriel Byrne, who's one of my favorite screen presences. Like, I just love seeing him on screen. It stars him, Isabelle Huppert, and Jesse Eisenberg. And so I paused there for a moment because Ebony had to sneeze, but she squelched the sneeze.
I did.
So the basic, plot device or the thrust of the story is that I think Isabelle Huppert plays a famed war photographer. I think she dies on an assignment, and then that Ebony's sneeze squelching powers are just heroic. They're tremendous. And her death, I think, sets off, ripples emotionally in the family between figures like her son, played by Jesse Eisenberg, I think her husband, played by, I think, Gabriel Byrne, and so on. So, it's gotten some very positive, mixed, but reactions, but some quite positive. So
I'm excited for this. And
yeah.
for those of you who are following along with Cinemaball,
Mhm.
you should be excited too. I mean, it follows Louder Than Bombs.
Yeah.
Like, we were really trying to make up for Kickboxer.
Yeah,
So-
this is our little prestige, you
Yeah.
know, like good film. You know, we got if I'm gonna get us to knock off, this probably isn't gonna last. So enjoy it while it lasts.
Exactly. All right, cool. Before we say goodbye, we want to take a quick moment to mention that everything Feminist Frequency produces, including this very podcast, well, they all cost money, and we can't do all the things we do without support of you, our fantastic listeners, our readers, our viewers, and our fans. Throughout the month of May, we are running our annual fundraising drive, and this year we have set a goal of $35,000 to help us keep doing this vital work. Also to get me speech therapy. Please visit feministfrequency.com/donate and help us keep doing our vital work and our fun stuff too, like this ridiculousness.
Yeah. All right, that's going to do it for us this week, folks. Thanks so much to Simplecast, which hosts both this podcast and our flagship show, Feminist Frequency Radio. We'll see you back here next week for another round of Cinemaball.